Greetings and welcome to the fourth mini lecture in this introductory chapter one. In the last lecture, I was lecturing on indirect democracies, or what we often call republics. People sometimes make the assumption that democracy and republic are interchangeable. And if you're just talking about a system of democracy, I guess that's true. But keep in mind, in the last lecture, the primary thing I was trying to do was that I was trying to distinguish between a direct democracy, where people make laws themselves, like in an initiative in California or in a New England town meeting, versus a republic where people vote for representatives, and whether that's at the local level, state level, or at the national level, this exchange or this relationship between the people and their elected representatives is at the heart of what a Republican government is. And the debate about whether or not representatives should vote the wishes of the people, certainly that would be the quantity argument. And the argument for the delegate, of course, is that at least in political terms, people are equal, one man, one vote, that the majority sentiment should prevail. And so certainly if you look at representatives as being barometers of public opinion, then certainly the delegate notion makes a lot of sense. The other notion is a notion where you're putting a lot more power. You are trusting the representative to be an expert. And so here you have that quality argument. So the delegate is stressing quantity, the quantity of public sentiment, the majority rule. The trustee is arguing that just like in virtually all aspects of our life, where we hire professionals to look out for our interests, doctors, lawyers, pharmacists, car mechanics, etc. What the trustee is arguing is that if I'm a trustee, what I owe the people is my experience, my wisdom, and my judgment. And that shouldn't be questioned. That in this particular case, I should look out for the people I represent like a shepherd would look out for his flock, or like a parent would look after their child. And so 80% of Americans believed in that delegate notion, about 20% the trustee notion. Obviously, the delegate notion at first glance makes a lot more sense in a, quote, democratic society. But I told you at the end of the last lecture that I was going to tell you a story. It's one of my favorites. It is kind of a story that goes along at least with the best thing that I ever published. I published an article in Political Science Quarterly many, many years ago called Alliance Pathology, Some Institutional Lessons of the 1930s. And if you want to go online and look it up in Political Science Quarterly with my name, you can read it. At the heart of the article is, well, why didn't the democracies respond to Hitler in the Rhineland crisis? The democracies were more powerful. The democracies saw Hitler's invasion of the Rhineland as a violation of international law. And one of the reasons why the democracies didn't respond is because the people, especially in Great Britain, did not want their leaders to respond. So let me tell you a story of three men. The first is Stanley Baldwin. The second is Neville Chamberlain. And the third one, hopefully you've heard of, his name's Winston Churchill. So I told you at the end of the last lecture that when Adolf Hitler was elected in 1933, very, very quickly British public opinion rallied around this notion that Hitler was a moderate, he was a nice guy, this is a person that we need to form a friendship with, that in this particular case, Hitler was a guarantor of peace. Well, in the British government, there was a fundamental division between delegates and trustees. The delegates were led by the Prime Minister, Stanley Baldwin, and the Foreign Minister, Neville Chamberlain. And the trustee in this case was Winston Churchill. So Baldwin and Chamberlain when they ran for political office in 1935, told their party, in this case the Conservative Party, that we know what the people want overwhelmingly. They want pacifism. They don't want us to rearm. They do not want us to do anything provocative. So let's vote the wishes of the people. Let's tell the people that we're going to pursue this policy that they overwhelmingly endorse. Now, Winston Churchill dissented and said, gentlemen, there are worse things than losing an election, like possibly losing our civilization. You've read Hitler's book, Mein Kampf, and so have I. This guy is not a moderate. He is not a peace lover. This is a war lover. And if we don't stand up to Hitler now, we're going to go to war with him later when he is much stronger and much, much, much more dangerous. So Churchill was saying, don't vote the wishes of the people. The people are wrong. Look after the people. Vote their interests. And so here you see a classic example of delegates and trustees. And of course, in hindsight, Churchill looks really good. He turned out to be correct. Now, I don't want you to take this as Randall is saying that trusteeship is better than delegates. In this particular case, the trustee was clearly right. But we know there are problems with trustees. We know that they have engaged in abuses of power and arrogance of power. And I talked about all of those things earlier about Lord Acton stating that power corrupts. So don't think about a delegate or a trustee as better or worse. Think about there being a trade-off. Delegates give you something, but you pay for it in certain ways. And the same thing is true with a trustee. So I want you to understand what the concepts are and understand the pros and cons of each. The third and last system of democracy that I want to get into in the second half of this mini lecture is pluralism. Underline this, star this, whatever you do to let you know that this is a potential exam question coming. Pluralists make the assumption that government responds to citizens that are organized into groups, and I didn't write this down, but essentially the pluralist argues if all that connects people to the governmental system are elections, then the only time that people have political power in a democratic society is on election day. The pluralists say that while it's true that elections and representatives are important, on a day-to-day basis, what connects people to government are the interest groups that they form. That on a daily basis, interest groups attempt to lobby or influence representatives. So once again, my third and last attempt at very bad art. Let me put up my diagram. If you want to copy it, that's fine. But as you can see, here is pluralism. People form interest groups. The interest groups then try to lobby, if you don't like the word lobby, influence representatives who then make the laws for them. And we have an awful lot of interest groups. Now, if we were in class, I would do a survey. I've used this one for several years because it is an interest group that a lot of you have membership in. I'm a member of this special interest group. It's called AAA, right? So if you have a car and your car goes out, you may call them for tow service or a new battery. AAA is the second largest interest group in the United States. The largest is AARP. And AAA engages in politicking. They have a lobbyist in Sacramento. They lobby government officials on a whole variety of things, from insurance to highway funding to traffic safety to environmental emissions. You can go on and on and on. And these interest groups can be very, very powerful. And I'll illustrate this with kind of a personal story from my own life. It's It's one of these stories that's both good and bad. The bad thing is it did happen to me. The good thing is I survived this. When I was a young child, I was run over by my dad's drunk girlfriend, and I nearly died. Um, Drunk driving when I was a child in the 1960s was seen as a tragic accident. It was seen as a lapse in judgment. And to show you how things have changed, the woman who ran over me, Sandra, did not go to jail. She did not pay a fine. She was not allowed to drive for 6 months. That was her punishment. Now think about how things have changed. Imagine that you would know a 7-year-old who would get run over by a drunk person. What would the consequences be? Probably a fine, maybe even some jail time. Certainly, the punishment would be far harsher than revoking a driver's license for 6 months. And one of the reasons for this change is pluralism. There was a young woman who had a tragedy occur in her life. Her name was Candy Lightner. And she formed a new interest group called Mothers Against Drunk Driving. And in this particular case, Mothers Against Drunk Driving began to lobby representatives all over this country to stiffen their DUI standards. So for example, today every state has a minimum of a DUI standard of 0.10. In California, it's 0.08. Sentences for drunk driving have increased dramatically, and people see drunk driving very, very differently. They don't see it as a lapse in judgment. They see it as felony criminal behavior. And so interest groups are responsible in this case for that. Certainly, if you take a look at the Vietnam War, the Vietnam War started out pretty popular, and over time the war became more and more unpopular because anti-war interest groups began not only lobbying Congress, but actually voting Congress people out of office, and new anti-war younger legislators replaced them. There are two things that link us to government. One is political parties, and certainly that's what we think of when we think about indirect democracy or republic. Our representatives are almost all Democrats or Republicans, and so certainly political parties are one link to government. But the pluralists point out, and I think the pluralists point out successfully, that interest groups also link us to government. In a variety of issues. And you can think about the National Organization for Women. You can think about the National Rifle Association. I mentioned Mothers Against Drunk Driving earlier. There are thousands and thousands of interest groups. Now I want you to think back to the AAA example. There are hundreds of thousands, heck, there are millions of people who are AAA members. But think about this, for those of you out there who are AAA members. When your little blue or yellow proxy card comes in the mail to vote for your Board of Trustees, do you do it? My guess is you don't. I don't even do it, and I'm hyper interested in politics. Instead, I allow my lobbyist, I actually read the correspondence from AAA, so I have a brief idea of what they're dealing with, but I defer to them. Think about group projects. If you've ever been in a group project, and I hate them because I was one of these people who took over the group, typically what happens in a group project is one or two people kind of take over the group and most people follow. If you've taken sociology, you know that this is a very natural phenomenon. So put some stars next to that notion under 3A, the iron law of oligarchy. It's an old notion. It's over 100 years old, but it's still being taught, and I think it's still correct. And the iron law of oligarchy simply reads that in any given group, whether it's in your class or an interest group politically, only a few wield power or influence. And so that notion to step back is natural.